The great Henry David Thoreau once offered the following observation on human life, and he wrote, "The great mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. Silently, invisibly, just barely holding on amidst the struggles of lives of quiet desperation." This is something of what I'd like to talk about this morning. Today in our continuing study of the book of Proverbs, we consider a couple of verses that stand out particularly because they seem to communicate a sentiment that is rarely found within this book, a sort of a counterpoint to so much of it, if you will. As we've noted so far in this series, the bulk of Proverbs consists of a fairly practical, down-to-earth advice for a living. Do such and such and your life will go well, while conversely, if you do this other stuff, your life will be lousy, Very straightforward, very cut and dry. It's sort of, here's the issue, here's the answer, shape up, right? However, in our text today, a little hint of another side of the author seems to peek through, a side that seems to be aware also of some of the complexity and the ambiguity of life, the struggles and the pain, the issues not so easily resolved, not so easily answered, if they can even be answered at all. In its most modern translation, our text today reads like this: "No one can really know what's in your heart. Deep pain often hides behind laughter, and outward joy is really inward sorrow." Basically, the point of the text is this: that we also often go through life wearing masks, living behind facades. We go about our days, we function, we seem to be fine, but inside there are these issues that no one else really knows about, that work on us continually, that perhaps rip us apart all the time, that keep us from really living, that we almost end up trapped in and by, all alone. Fears, failures, losses, responsibilities, demands, addictions, lives of quiet desperation. One scholar puts it this way regarding our text today: "No description of human solitude is more exacting or penetrating than this, that ultimately, in our inmost self, we are only self." These verses say that even in gladness, perhaps most especially when surrounded by revelers, the heart is often entirely alone and deeply broken. And haven't we all had that experience at one time or another? Lived this perhaps more often than we'd like to admit? Going about our days, smiling, laughing, joking, how's it going? Oh, fine, great, right? On the outside, lighthearted and joyful, confident, while inside, falling apart, struggling, just barely hanging on, your heart breaking. Well, for me, this text, by raising this most basic fact of all human life, is thus saying, in effect, we need to address these things, that this is what's really going on in each of our lives all the time, and let us not ignore these things as we so often do, but let's deal with them. And this is what I like to do. Just offer a couple of suggestions regarding those problems in your life that seem to trap you inside of them alone. For when you're going about your life, but it's fake, you're not really living. Internally, these things have a hold of you and they're consuming you, and you don't know quite how to get past them. 3 thoughts for when the problems in your life seek to trap you inside of them alone. Thought number 1, trust that God is there. I think that the first most fundamental point that this text seeks to make to us, simply by stating the problem, is that God is aware of it. That God knows all about it. Now, this may seem obvious. Of course God knows about it. God knows everything. However, note that this is actually no small point, for consider what it says to us. It says that as alone as we may often feel within the struggles of our lives, we are never truly alone within any of them. God is right there, God knows, God understands, God is there. As Jesus said, "Behold, I am with you always." Right? Or as the psalmist writes, putting it this way: "Where can I go from your spirit, or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light around me will become night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as the day, for darkness is as light to you. In other words, there is no place too far gone or too seemingly alone that is beyond the presence and love of God. And this, I believe, is the first point here that is meant to direct us toward the first step that we need to take whenever we feel trapped or alone within our struggles, namely, to affirm this presence and to put our trust in it. Truly to insist upon, no matter what anything says, to in effect say to ourselves, no matter how I feel today, no matter how lost and alone, and maybe even God-forsaken, things seem, I believe God is in me, is with me, in loving me in this moment, and I'm going to trust in that, and I'm going to look for that, right? That is, very simply, so often we trap ourselves in our solitude, first because we choose solitude. We think it's the only option, right? But the truth is that God is always there with us. Wherever we are never alone. And we need only choose to complete that connection from our side, affirm it, and look to it. Preacher James Hewitt writes, "When my son was a toddler, washing his hair was always a problem. He would sit in the bathtub while I put shampoo on his head. Then when I poured on the water to make a lather, he would tip his head down so that the shampoo ran into his eyes, causing him pain and tears. I explained that if he just looked straight up at me, he would avoid getting the shampoo in his face. He would agree. Then as soon as I started to rinse his hair, his fear would overcome his trust, and he would look down again. Naturally, the shampoo would run into his face again, and there would be more tears. During one of our sessions, while I was trying to convince him to lift up his head and to trust me, I suddenly realized how this situation was like my relationship to God. I know that God is my Father, and I'm sure that He loves me. I believe that I trust in Him, but more often than not, in a difficult situation, I panic and I turn my eyes away from Him. This never solves the problem. I just become more and more afraid as the shampoo blinds and stings me. If I would just tilt my head back and look at Him, I'd do fine. If I just tilt my head back and look at Him, I'd do fine." An anonymous Christian once penned the following words: "I'm too blessed to be stressed and too anointed to be disappointed. I refuse to be discouraged, to be sad, or to cry. I refuse to be downhearted, and here's the reason why. I have a God who is almighty, who is sovereign and supreme. I have a God who loves me, and I am on His team. He is all wise and powerful. Jesus is His name. Though everything else is changeable, my God remains the same. I refuse to be defeated. My eyes are on my God. He has promised to be with me as through this life I trod. I am looking past my circumstances to heaven's throne above. My prayers have reached the heart of God. I am resting in His love. I give thanks to Him in everything. My eyes are on His face. The battle is His. The victory is mine. He will help me win the race. I repeat, I am too blessed to be stressed and too anointed to be disappointed." It has been said that the triumphant Christian does not fight for victory. He merely celebrates a victory already won. We don't need to seek something we don't yet have. We need to only hold fast to what is already and always ours, How are you getting beaten up in life? Because you've lost sight of what is yours always in Jesus Christ. Thought number one, when the problems of your life seek to trap you inside of them alone, trust that God is there with you. Thought number two, then, give voice to your pain. Building then upon this idea that within the struggles of life in which we feel most alone, we actually aren't alone, comes the principle that to realize this, we have to embrace this idea, That is, we have to move our issues out beyond ourselves, share our struggles, and thus break the inward solitary hold that they've got upon us, Basically, we have to express our pain, our difficulty, get it out beyond ourselves. This is crucial to ever starting the healing process. To put it another way, whenever we have problems, we need to vent them, right? It's human nature. It's a key step we absolutely have to make. If we don't vent our problems, they fester and they grow and they eventually consume us. Conversely, quite often, just venting our problems does away with them. As Shakespeare said, "Give sorrow words. The grief that does not speak whispers to the o'erfraught heart and bids it break." The second step in getting free of the troubles that hold us is speaking our grief. It's giving voice to our pain, And this has two parts to it. The first is offering these things up to God in prayer, right? Key fact, God is always there, and God loves to talk, right? Maybe you can't quite yet bring yourself to talk about the things inside you, to somebody else, or maybe you're afraid to, or maybe you're ashamed to, right? Maybe you don't even know quite what to say, what you're feeling, but you can always tell that to God. You can always talk to God. And anything you may talk about isn't going to shock God because God knows about it already, right? What's the old hymn verse? Oh, what peace we often forfeit. Oh, what needless pain we bear. All because we do not carry everything to God in prayer. What a friend we have in Jesus, all our sins and griefs to bear. Right? Crucial thing to remember when you feel all trapped and alone in your problems. God is always there, and God loves to talk. He's waiting to talk, Take it to the Lord in prayer. Vent it with the Lord. Break the solitude and hold of your pain by first venting to God. Give it to God. I'm reminded of the really familiar old story about the little boy, was having all sorts of problems in his life, and his mother could tell that he was really deeply troubled. But since when she asked him about it, he couldn't seem to be able to bring himself to talk to her about what was bothering him. She suggested that the boy talk to God about it and to take his problems to God in prayer. Well, the little boy liked this idea, and immediately he went up into his room to pray. Well, the mother was, of course, somewhat nosy, and she just had to know what was going on with her son, And so she snuck up quietly to the door of his room, and she peered in. There she saw her son kneeling at the side of his bed, his hands clasped, but he wasn't praying. He was just reciting his ABCs. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Hearing this, the mother stepped into the boy's room, and she confronted him with it. I thought you were going to pray, right? Said the mother. I am praying, answered the boy. No, you're not, said the mother angrily. You're just reciting your ABCs. To which the little boy replied, I know it. It's just that, well, I didn't know how to say what I'm feeling, what words to use. And so I figured I just put all the letters out there and let God figure it out. Right? Right? It's good advice. Put it all out there and let God figure it out. God's really good at that. So first, in starting to move your troubles out beyond yourself and venting them, bring your struggles to God in prayer. And then secondly, aim to offer your struggles to some other human being. Obviously, the flip side in this text of the fact that God knows what's going on deep hidden within our hearts is the fact that nobody else really knows, right? And this, of course, is stated is the whole premise of this text. That nobody else really knows the real pain that is within us, the stuff that we're struggling with every day. And this, I believe, is the setup for another major difficulty that so often keeps us trapped within our problems. Plainly stated, along with always being there with us to talk to, one of the primary ways that God cares for us in our problems is through the care and kindness and support of other people. It's kind of like the old story of the little girl who had great faith in God, but as she said, every once in a while, I need somebody with skin on, right? Sometimes we need somebody with skin on, right? That is, it's crucial first to have a spiritual relationship with God, the thing just mentioned, but we're also weak and we're limited and we're physical human beings, and so sometimes we need the tangible flesh and blood help of somebody. And God recognizes this and gives to it. God seeks to work in our lives through other people by bringing them into our lives. But the simple fact is that these other people can't help us if they don't know what our problem is. And they can never really know what our problems are if we don't tell them, right? Well, unfortunately, what happens more often than not is that for a whole variety of reasons, we never really tell anybody what our true struggles are. We refuse to ever really ask for help. A lot of times we do this out of pride. Sometimes we do this out of fear. Sometimes we do this because we believe we should be strong and be able to handle our problems on our own, and we're afraid of being seen or seeing ourselves as somehow weak. Sometimes we do this simply because we assume others should know what we're going through and what we need, especially those closest to us, right? It's like the old, if you really loved me, you know what's bothering me kind of thing. It's the scourge of marriages everywhere, right? We assume people have ESP. It's ridiculous. But whatever, we remain trapped alone because we never directly share our struggle. We never speak it. Well, as this text makes clear, not even the closest person to you can ever really know what's going on within you unless you stop and really explain it to them. If you want help, you've got to ask. You have to say what the problem is. And the truth of the matter is that all around us are people who really want to help, who are eager to help, and who can help. But they can't do everything or do the right thing if we don't tell them what the struggle is. We have to be willing to open up. Now, this may be scary, but think about it. Isn't the alternative that we also often choose ultimately worse? How are you remaining trapped alone within your ultimately even scarier and more devastating pain and struggles because he refused to ever really open up to anyone and to ask for help. You know, I once read that the great author of the book Roots, Alex Haley, that he used to keep on his desk a photograph of a turtle on a fence post. And when he asked the significance of this, Haley would reply, "Whenever you see a turtle on a fence post, you know that he had help getting there and that he's going to need help getting back down," right? And it reminds me that at times I will require help to get through life, and I need to be willing to ask for it. Right? So often the care we so desperately need, the very healing of our problems, is right nearby. It's right next to us. But we never receive it because we never ask. We never allow ourselves to be truly vulnerable, to be human beings, and to give our pain voice. You know, Christian author Sharon Salazar writes, "Since I was 12 years old, I've suffered with a condition called trichotillomania, which in layman's terms is compulsive hair pulling. The physical devastation was severe, but the emotional damage was worse. When I was young, no one, including my doctor, knew how to help. I was all alone. Growing up, I didn't fit in anywhere, and I suffered great shame knowing that I had brought this affliction upon myself. My hands seemed to have a mind of their own. What's wrong with me, I'd often wonder. Sometimes people inquired about my lack of eyelashes and eyebrows. It was tough enough being a teen without the added torment of this condition. Although I was lonely, I kept people at a distance, but each night before I fell asleep, I'd pray for wisdom and for God to send someone who understood. In 1985, when I was 25, I read a letter in Ann Landers from a mom whose child suffered from compulsive hair pulling. I could hardly believe my eyes. After all these years, I discovered I am not alone. In fact, my condition even had a medical name, and Ann Landers pointed out that over 1 million people suffer from this syndrome. At that moment, my journey for healing began. I took small steps at first, telling only a few friends. Some said, ugh, but others tried to understand. Then they began to share their secrets with me, and I learned to see myself as the way God saw me, as someone deserving of love. Then one day, my miracle happened. A friend called with wonderful news. She said she just met a woman with trich, just someone just like me. She gave me her phone number, and I was ecstatic. I quickly dialed, and from the minute Christina answered, we began to chat like old friends, both thrilled to find someone who understood our pain. We planned to meet soon, but in the meantime, she wanted to mail me some literature on the subject, and when I gave her my address, she let out a piercing scream. Even though I resided in a lightly populated rural area of Soquel, California, it turned out we lived only 2 houses away. We immediately dropped our phones and in the dark of night ran outside in our pajamas where we hugged, cried, and talked for hours. She shared her dream about opening a trich learning center, and I shared mine to write a book about my lonely experience. I felt I just met my long-lost twin, someone who understood my pain and my struggles. There was no doubt about it, I was looking into the eyes of a true miracle. When we walked back to my house and into the light, Christina slowly lifted up her long hair, revealing patchy bald spots. Then with a deep breath, I took off all my makeup and let her see me as no one else ever had, not even my husband of 10 years. In that moment, I knew my childhood prayer had been answered. Understand, God has brought the care that you need right near you, but no one knows what you need if you don't tell them. Thought number 2, when the problems in your life seek to trap you inside of them alone, give voice to your pain. Don't hold it in. Vent it in prayer to God and in sharing with those around you. All of which brings us to the final point. Thought number 3, let yourself be drawn out into life. In the end, what I finally found most interesting about our text today, what most caught my attention about it, and what makes it so completely unlike everything else in the book of Proverbs, is that it states a problem but doesn't really give any answer to it, It's more sort of like, well, here's how it is. And I believe this may be the final greatest lesson that we're meant to get here. That in the end, what this text wants to tell us is that for a lot of the pain and struggles in our lives, there is no answer, right? There's no pat solution that makes everything right, that takes all the hurt and all the wrong away. Rather, these things are something we always live with, part of who we are. They're part of life. And that's the point, you see. That they are just part, right? That is, as God here, in literary fashion, draws out this issue within us and places it within the wider context of so many other issues in the book of Proverbs, so God, in a way, is trying to teach us something of how God works, of how life itself works, that not needing to fix the issues of who we are, but simply to draw us out to touch the life, the broader life beyond them, to place these things within the wider context. To put it another way, what I believe this text finally teaches us is that the final way we so often close ourselves off and leave ourselves trapped all alone, overwhelmed within our problems, is that we convince ourselves our brokenness must be repaired, must be done away with, must be gotten over before we can ever really live. While God instead says, no, those tough things are part of life. They're part of who you are. They cannot and they will not be taken away. The trick, if you will, is simply to remember that they're just part of your life. They're not the sum total. Let me bring some more life to you today. Final lesson here, very simply, in the struggles deep within your heart, don't get so hung up on having to get over them. Instead, simply open your heart to how God is trying to draw you out to touch life beyond them in a moment of beauty or joy or hope or involvement or purpose. Let God draw you out to touch life beyond your pain, which is what God is always working to do. In closing, consider the following true story. A couple of years ago at a small coffee shop in Portland, Oregon, a woman pulled up to the drive-thru to buy a cup of coffee. The woman was in a rush to get to work, and particularly she was consumed by deep worries about the results of some major medical tests she had just taken. And she was just lost in her thoughts, lost in her fears, But as she sat there waiting for her order to be filled, she happened to look up in the rearview mirror, and she noticed the woman in the car behind her. And this woman looked very sad, and this caught the first woman's attention, and for a moment she forgot about all her problems, and she just felt moved to do something to try to lift this other woman's obviously very sad spirits. And she said a quick prayer for the woman, and then she had an idea. When her coffee came, she paid for her order, and then she handed the clerk a couple of extra bucks, saying, "This is to pay for the coffee of the woman behind me." The first woman then drove off, and unbeknownst to her, the woman behind her was so thankful for this, it so lifted her day that she proceeded to pay for the person following her. This then set up a string of kindness, one stranger paying for the coffee of the next customer, that continued for an hour and a half and 37 customers. Right? A few weeks later, the woman who had started all this stopped in for coffee again, and the clerk recognized her, and he proceeded to tell her all the wonderful joy her simple act of kindness had accomplished. And then the clerk added a comment that took the woman totally off guard. She said, "You helped so many people that day, and you helped me. I hate my job here, but that day I felt I was part of something big. God bless you." With tears in her eyes, the woman took her coffee and then looked in her mirror, handed the clerk a few extra dollars, saying, "This is for the person behind me." And the clerk, smiling, said, "You're on." Life found by letting God draw us out beyond ourselves. No one can really know what's in your heart. Deep pain often hides behind laughter, and outward joy is really inward sorrow. What things do you struggle with alone, deep within? On the outside, seemingly fine, but on the inside, your heart is breaking. Let God save you from a life of quiet desperation. Trust that God is there, give voice to your pain, and invite God to draw you out to life. Let us join together in singing our closing hymn, number 364, "Because He Lives." Would you please stand?